Hi, welcome to the new session, Methods of Enquiry in Psychology. So far, we have discussed and completed first unit and moving forward for the next one. So what is a method? A method can be a set of rules in understanding or studying something or an object. It is a systematic procedure. It can be a scientific method. And what do you mean by inquiry? Inquiry is a formal way of interviewing or knowing in-depth details of something. So, when a psychologist tries to understand the problem of the client, he may use few methods to collect information from the client. In the same manner, uh, the psychologists or the other scientists work, a psychologist may also work in the same way. Like there may be experimental methods, non-experimental methods, etc. So coming to the methods of inquiry and chapter 2, here the goals or what you will be understanding by the end of this chapter are what are the goals, nature of psychological inquiry. Generally, it is scientific, but as we know, psychology as a natural science and social science, particularly internal behavior and external behavior, here there may be both scientific methods and general inquiry involved. And even what are the different types of data used by psychologists? So that data, it can be both quantitative data and qualitative data. These are all things will be detailedly explained and studied in this chapter. Some important methods, particularly it is important methods and analyzing data, how we analyze the data. This is really an important chapter because even though the first unit has dealt with like what the psychology is, what psychologists do, what are the different branches, and how psychology relate to the work and everyday life. Now we try to understand how psychologists work, what they use, how do they study. We learned so far what are all involved. Now we will go into the depth knowledge of how, what is the procedure involved in, what are all involved in the psychological study. All these things, but still, though it is having a broad scope, it has its limitations. So what are all the limitations? That will be discussed at the end of this chapter. So next, what are all in this chapter? If you can see, an idea that is developed and put into action is more important than an idea that exists only as an idea. Idea and an action. Here, how the, if you can recall, the first quotation in unit 1 is about the wonder or the invention of the brain or the functioning of the brain, knowing it. Like it is about the understanding. Now, if you can see here, it is about action. How do they work? Even though there may be a lot of assumptions, but a psychologist has to act on something and start doing it. So that's how a psychologist work. They don't just assume or they just don't speak whatever it comes. It is a scientific study, and particularly they will help people. So, and then coming to the chapter's contents, it has introduction, goals, steps of conducting a research, alternative paradigms, research, nature of psychological data, so goals, nature, analyzing, and limitation. So these are all the things which we will be studying in this chapter. So then we will see the other important things in depth. There are the steps involved: observational method, experimental and non-experimental method, correlational research, survey method, and testing, psychological testing. What are all tests involved in psychological inquiry? So next to it, coming to the introduction part. If we can see, as we have known in psychological, in the first unit, we have studied about the psychological definition. Like the definition deals with the experiences, behaviors, mental processes. We have detailedly understood about what are all the experiences, what is a behavior, like overt and covert behavior, the mental process, what are all involved in the mental process, like learning, memory, thinking, cognitive processes, and others. And now, as I said, even though knowing this, how psychologists do this one. So you may have got that doubt how these people do. And in other words, what methods are they used to study the behavior and mental process? What are all involved in this? So we will see them in detail. Okay. And psychologists, for this, psychologists rely on formal, systematic observations. So formal and systematic observations. These are scientific ways. Generally, if you can see, it is not the normal ones. It is like not like simply observing and telling something like it's not a friendly talk. It's a scientific talk. There is a procedure involved in it, and particularly the questions raised by the client or the questions raised to inquire, to collect information from the client. And the methodology is that the methods, the steps, or the procedures involved in the particular method. The methodology is a set of methods which helps us to understand these processes that make psychology as a scientific endeavor. As a scientific endeavor. As we said, it is a scientific journey. It is also to be understand that how we study or collect the information or understand the client in a scientific manner. Psychologists use a variety of research methods because the questions about human behavior are numerous and all of them cannot be studied in a single method. As even I said in the earlier that scientific study, particularly human behavior, is a very complex behavior. It will it may be difficult to understand a human behavior in a normal way. So there should be both the naturalistic and scientific approach. In such a manner, the methods used in psychological inquiry should also be naturalistic and experimental, the scientific methods. As one single method may not be enough. If we can recall unit 1, there are different types of psychologists like cognitive psychologists, neuropsychologists, behavioral therapists, behavioral psychologist, and social psychologist. These people work in different settings and the methods used are also different. So that's how the methods used are not sufficient. You have to have a mixed approach. And particularly human behavior, as it is overt and covert, you may need to understand it in various ways. Okay. So what are the methods we can understand? Here if we can see, there is an observation, experimental, correlational research, survey, psychological testing, etc. So these are the methods more frequently used to study the problems in psychology. So there may be one or two methods. Now we will try to understand the methods, like as I said, as mentioned, these methods we discuss and understand and use it in the coming unit part of the study. This unit also, this chapter also familiarize you with goals of the psychological inquiry. What are the goals of the psychological inquiry? As I said, the inquiry is a method. It's a method of questioning. It's a method of understanding. So having a general talk than goal orientation. Like if you see, when you join the course like an MBEP or a particular program at college, you have some goal. Like you want to reach to the science courses and become a scientist. And if it is an arts or humanities course, you may be involved in social services. So in such a way, here as a part of psychological inquiry, you should have some goal that will save time and help the client to recover from his problems. Very a speedy method can be good and a scientific method can be good than a hurry-burry one or a method which takes more time. The nature of information, the information is a very key part in any psychological inquiry. If you can see, the information itself, without that, we cannot understand the client. We have to analyze the data. We have to collect the information, particularly related to that problem. As I said, even the observation of the client is difficult in psychological. It may have a influence. You cannot, in one or just one conversation cannot give you the whole information, and even you cannot rely on that one because man, as I said, it's a complex one. he has the ability to hide or to give more information. So the certainty of that information is still a question. So you have to ask multiple questions to ascertain those facts which is delivered by the client. And particularly these methods, understanding these various methods, we can try to understand the data collected from the client in a very effective manner. And even as there are many methods, like methodological devices like such tests or any other methods to understand the client, some important issues related to psychological study, you will try to understand them in this unit. So this gives you a brief understanding of this unit, and let us see what are involved in the unit. So if you can see, by the end of this subject, there are 2 project ideas. As in the earlier, there are some 12 review questions, the goals of scientific inquiry, all this thing. There is a lot of work in this unit. You have to be very quick in understanding. If you have any queries, please get back to me as early as possible so that we can. This is really an important one, very important unit. This unit, understanding this unit and understanding psychology subject will give you to study and understanding human behavior, particularly as we are dealing with human beings. How we can understand the behavior or all will be discussed in one. Even I'm introducing project ideas in this chapter because I want to save time, and it will, as we are it's like a we have very short time. If you can see these 2 studies, there are 2 studies which you have to make it in a very short time. Okay, anyways, this will be understanding during the end of the weeks, or particularly classes. And particularly as I said, scientific method, this hypothesis, variables, these identifying these things should be clearly understood by you, and any queries has to be clear in the time itself. So you have to conduct 2 projects in this unit. Yes, uh, let us finish up the write-up work and understanding these ones. Of course, these can be done in online, so there is no issue at all. Let's work on this unit and try to understand these things. And let me also introduce the other material. We will also discuss this one because this has a very good depth of information. The methods used in psychology, particularly related to Odisha material. This was the reference material, so we also use this one. So let's see what's in this one. You also go into the like what you can say. One second. So he directly jumped into the methods. After coming here, let's see the introduction here. Psychology as a science uses methods, systematic and objective, verifiable findings. This is a scientific method that should be objective and verifiable and replicable. Based on that, whether a branch of knowledge can be called as a science and or not depends on the method it uses to study its specific subject matter. What he wants to say is that any method, whether it is science or something, it studies, it uses to study its specific subject matter. So every science has its methods of study to suit its subject matter. Psychology also have some methods which we will be discussing. Like other sciences, psychology has developed its own methods. That's what it is, a mixture. Both it uses non-experimental and experimental methods. It uses a naturalistic method and a scientific method. A study of historical development of psychology. Historical development of psychology shows that scientific methods were not used when it was treated as a branch of philosophy. As a branch of philosophy. Particularly in India, it is first introduced as a part of philosophical study, and then it emerged into a separate field. But as a modern times in the 20th century, 19th century, psychology claims as a scientific study and after the establishment of William Wundt in Leipzig, particularly, there are scientific psychologists and scientists who gave importance to psychology as a scientific study, and particularly coming to the status of science. Some of the important methods as discussed: observation, experimental method, correlation method, case history, which is very important during the mental status examination of the client. If you are even particularly case history or maintaining data, the information, proper information of the client is really important. So in such a way, it is really important for us to know these methods and use them in an appropriate manner. Use them in an appropriate manner. Whenever there is a need of a method, we will adopt that method and get information. So overall, this is the information, the introduction to psychology, particularly second units, the methods of inquiry in psychology. If you have any queries, so please write to us for the queries. Get back to us as early as possible so that we can cover the most interesting topics in the unit and in a very clear understanding way. Okay, so that's it. Thank you so much. We end the session here. If you have any queries regarding the introduction, you just write to us. Okay, have a great day. We shall meet in the next session.